They say blood is thicker than water, but in my family, blood is just the liquid we use to drown each other. I sat there, Elena Vance, the one branded the mistake of the lineage, quietly watching the perfect drama unfold in our lavish Greenwich estate. My mother, Lydia, was busy adjusting her Chanel pearls, her mouth never stopping as she praised Sophia, the genius sister, who was her only source of pride in front of the high society guests. In my hand was a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, deep red like the color of blood. And in my purse, my phone was vibrating incessantly with emails notifying me of DNA results. The grandfather clock on the mantel ticked coldly, counting down every second to midnight. I smiled. It wasn't the forced smile I'd worn for 20 years. It was a sharp, quiet smile, the smile of someone holding the ultimate ace. They had no idea that their glass castle of lies was about to shatter. The Vance estate in Greenwich wasn't just a $10 million piece of real estate, it was a museum of self-importance, where every object was polished so brightly it reflected the chilling emptiness inside. In this family, legacy and bloodline were extremist religions. My father, Arthur Vance, a litigation attorney whose reputation was built on the corpses of defeated rivals, viewed children as strategic investments. Sophia, my golden child sister, was the blue-chip stock that only went up beautiful, sharp, and a Harvard valedictorian. And me? I was the bad debt they had to write off every year just to keep the family balance sheet looking perfect. Elena, don't stand too close to the chandelier, my mother, Lydia, said in a voice as soft yet as sharp as a scalpel while we prepared for dinner. She was adjusting Sophia's Valentino silk gown, her eyes full of cult-like admiration. That light highlights the flaws in your face. It's a shame you didn't inherit my perfect bone structure like your sister. I suppose that's why I've always called you the mistake, isn't it? She let out a dry, aristocratic laugh, while Sophia merely curled her lip in a triumphant smirk. At dinner, the contrast became suffocating. Under the flickering candlelight and the heavy scent of expensive lilies, I sat like a ghost at my own family's table. Arthur droned on about the purity of the Vance bloodline, talking about ancestors who were governors and Supreme Court justices as if the blood in their veins were liquid gold. "This blood doesn't accept mediocrity," he declared, his icy gaze sliding over me like I was a stain on the white linen tablecloth. "Elena, if you can't do anything to improve your image, at least learn to keep your mouth shut. Don't dilute the elite atmosphere your sister worked so hard to create." I didn't answer. My hands remained perfectly steady as I cut into my medium-rare steak. They wanted to see me break. They wanted me to scream, so they'd have more proof that I was mentally unstable, a true system error. But they didn't know that my silence wasn't submission, it was the observation of a predator. I was filing away every slight, every look of disdain, and every insult into a steel cabinet in my mind. The contrast between this self-proclaimed royal family and the discarded bastard child was hilarious. The more they worshipped their blood, the more exhilarated I felt knowing that their pride was about to turn into black ash. Doubt never starts with a big bang. It starts with a creeping chill, a small off-key note in a symphony of lies. 2 weeks before Christmas, when Lydia forced me into the dusty attic to find the antique silver set from my grandmother's time, what she called the symbol of pure inheritance, I found something else entirely. Hidden behind stacks of 90 Seconds, Vogue magazines, and spiderwebbed suitcases was an old biscuit tin, rusted at the corners. It didn't belong in the modern luxury of the Vance home. It looked out of place, just like me. Inside, there was no silver and no jewelry, only a bundle of handwritten letters tied with a frayed red ribbon and a blurry Polaroid. In the photo, my mother, young, radiant, and wearing a rebellious look I'd never seen, was hugging a stranger. He wasn't Arthur. He had messy dark hair and deep, soulful eyes with the rugged look of a starving artist, the polar opposite of my father's rigid, ice-sculpted demeanor. His name was Julian. I started reading the letters, and every line stabbed through the truth I had lived my whole life. They were sent in March 1999, a time when, according to the official timeline, my father was in London handling a multi-billion-dollar bank merger. The words weren't just romantic, they were evidence of absolute betrayal. "I wish we could run away before he gets back," one letter read. And then a scribbled note on an old receipt from an OBGYN clinic in the suburbs. "The result is positive. What do we do?" I was born in December 1999. A simple calculation was enough to make a normal person's world collapse. But for me, it brought a brutal sense of relief. It turned out the reason my mother called me the mistake, the reason she looked at me with secret loathing every time I showed a trait that wasn't like Arthur, wasn't because I was a failure. It was because I was the living proof of the impurity she tried to wash away with designer clothes and lavish charity galas. I was the result of a moment of weakness with a mediocre man she wanted to forget. An idea began to take shape in my head, cold and sharp as a honed blade. If this family worshipped blood that much, I would give them the truth about it. I looked down at Julian's photo, then at my own hands that bore no resemblance to Arthur Vance. A subtle smile appeared. I didn't need to scream or cry about the injustice. I just needed a small tool of science to strip the masks off these self-proclaimed aristocrats. That night, I ordered 5 23andMe DNA kits, paying with a secret credit card I'd been saving. The real game was just beginning. Christmas in Greenwich isn't a holiday. It's a luxury arms race where 20-foot trees are draped in Swarovski crystals and gold-plated invitations are sent out like declarations of status. While my mother, Lydia, was busy coordinating a design team to turn the living room into a winter wonderland as cold as her own heart, I began performing the most delicate surgery of my life. The 5 small 23andMe boxes were tucked away in my locked drawer. They looked so small and harmless, but I knew that inside that plastic casing was the power to level this fake empire. I spent the afternoon wrapping them in the most expensive silver tissue paper, tying them with black silk ribbons, a color choice Lydia would surely dismiss as morbid. But to me, it was the color of the end. Arthur and Lydia always took pride in their clean family tree, as if it were a flawless work of art. Arthur frequently reminded us that the Vance blood was a pure stream tracing back to the first settlers. How ironic. When I placed the gifts under the tree, Arthur looked at me with blatant pity. "What did you get, Elena? A cookbook or a knitting kit?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt for a child he believed had no future. I looked him straight in the eye and smiled, not my usual submissive smile, but the smile of someone holding the detonator. "I'm giving the family the truth, Father. A chance for us to truly understand our great roots through DNA testing." Sophia walked in, glowing in a red velvet dress, holding a glass of champagne. "DNA? You must be bored, Elena. We know exactly who we are. We're winners." I looked at my sister, the child considered the pinnacle of Arthur and Lydia's union, and wondered how she would react when she found out her princess status was built on a rotting foundation. I simply replied in a chillingly calm tone. "Sometimes science shows us things the eyes miss when they're blinded by pride, Sophia." Lydia scoffed, assuming this was just a desperate plea for attention. She had no idea she had just signed the death warrant for her own reputation. Everything was set. The bombs were planted under the tree, waiting to be triggered on New Year's Eve, the moment the results would be sent directly to everyone's email via the automated notification system. I started the countdown. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall felt like an exhilarated heartbeat in my chest. I had endured 20 years of humiliation, labeled the mistake, the stain on a prestigious name. But in the shadow of this plan, I felt more powerful than ever. The new year was coming, and it wouldn't start with empty toasts. It would start with the thunderous collapse of a myth called Vance. I sat down, sipped my bitter tea, and let that. Christmas morning at the Vance mansion looked exactly like a scene from a Nancy Meyers movie, minus any actual human warmth. The scent of fresh pine mingled with expensive Jo Malone candles, and snow began to fall outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a scene so perfect it felt fake. Lydia sat in a velvet armchair, an artisanal latte in hand, looking like a queen granting her presents to her subjects. Sophia, radiant in designer silk pajamas, was busy taking aesthetic photos next to a mountain of gifts from luxury brands. "Look, Elena," Sophia said, her voice full of smugness as she held up a Birkin bag our father had just given her. "There are some things this bloodline deserves, and some people who only deserve to watch." I didn't snap back with my usual anger. Instead, I stood up, walked to the tree, and pulled out 4 gifts wrapped in silver tissue with jet black ribbons. "I have gifts for everyone too," I said, my voice so calm Arthur actually looked up from his financial paper. When they tore off the wrapping and saw the 23andMe logo, a strange silence filled the room. Arthur smirked, a dry, hollow sound. ancestry testing? Elena, what are you trying to prove? That we're descended from royalty? We already know that from the family archives. Lydia picked up the test tube with discreet disgust, as if it were a foreign object that had fallen from a cheap planet. What an odd gift, Elena. It's so scientific and unrefined. But fine, if you want to play genealogy detective to feel like you belong here, I'll indulge you. She had no idea that when she spat into that tube, she was personally signing her own declaration of ruin. Sophia laughed hysterically. I hope the results show you're actually their child and weren't just picked up from a dumpster somewhere. I smiled the second smile of my plan. It was the smile of someone watching a well-prepared execution. You should be careful what you wish for, Sophia, I said softly. I had set up accounts for the whole family using the Vance family's shared email domain, ensuring all results would hit at the exact same time. The grandfather clock on the fireplace ticked away tick, tick like the countdown of a time bomb. Only 6 days until New Year's Eve, I reminded them as I walked toward the door. The results should be in just in time for us to start the new year with the absolute truth. They went back to their expensive piles of gifts, continuing to mock my cheap present, never realizing that the shadows were starting to swallow the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree. The pressure of the ticking clock was mounting, at least for me, the one counting every second until this glass castle shattered. Greenwich in late December was submerged in the gray of melting snow and bone-chilling winds blowing in from the Atlantic. Inside the Vance estate, the atmosphere was even more frozen than the outdoors. Silence hung in the long hallways, broken only by the click-clack of the Louboutins Lydia wore, as she did a final check for the New Year's gala. This was the biggest event of the year for Connecticut's elite, where every detail from the freshness of the white orchids to the placement of the Cristal champagne was calculated to project absolute power. Lydia walked through the living room and saw me sitting quietly by the fire. She didn't bother to stop, just tossed a comment over her shoulder in her usual cold tone. Elena, wear your most discreet black dress tonight and try not to stand too close to the spotlight. I don't want the guests from Manhattan wondering about the difference between you and Sophia. Purity is the theme tonight, and as you know, you've always been an unexplained smudge on the record. Sophia walked by, holding an iPad displaying her perfect grades, and scoffed, "Don't worry, Mom. She's probably too busy dreaming about that cheap DNA test. Maybe she's hoping she's the lost princess of some kingdom instead of the failure sitting here." The silence before the storm is always the most terrifying, but to me, it was cruelly beautiful. I felt the phone in my pocket vibrate. A notification from the 2, 3, and Me app appeared on the lock screen. Your results are ready. I didn't open it immediately. I wanted that truth to ripen in their arrogance. I looked up at the mahogany grandfather clock in the hall. The minute hand was inching toward 12. It wasn't just the start of a new year. It was the start of the purge I had so carefully staged. Every passing second was a beat of the ticking clock coming down on this fake order. I began to see my mother panic in small, private ways. She received an email notification on her gold-plated iPhone, but quickly shut the screen, her face momentarily turning a shade of pale that only an observer like me would catch. Arthur, too, he stood on the balcony with a cigar in hand, but forgot to light it, his eyes staring anxiously into the night. They were afraid. They worshipped their blood so much that when faced with undeniable scientific truth, they felt the foundation beneath them begin to tremble. I lightly touched my cold tea, feeling a jolt of exhilaration run down my spine. They thought I was the mistake, the one without a voice. But in a few hours, when the fireworks exploded over the Long Island Sound, I would be the one holding the scepter in this tragedy. This silence was my final gift to them before the truth exploded, turning 20 years of cover-ups into worthless shards. The New Year's Eve party at the Vance mansion was an exhibition of hypocrisy wrapped in silk and diamonds. The wealthiest people in Greenwich gathered under glowing crystal chandeliers, sipping 2008 Krug champagne and talking about billion-dollar mergers and Hamptons vacations. My father, Arthur, stood at the center of the room, radiant as an emperor. He had just received a prestigious award from the Bar Association and was in the middle of a speech about the importance of a family with a solid foundation. Beside him, Lydia wore a perfect smile, her gown shimmering like shark scales under the lights. "We've always taught our children that a reputation is hard to build but easy to break," Arthur said loudly, his arms sweeping through the air with authority. And purity in lifestyle and in blood is what sets the Vances apart. Sophia stood next to them, chin held high, looking down at me with disdain as I stood alone in the shadows of the balcony. I wasn't wearing the discreet black dress, Lydia demanded. I chose a deep crimson silk, the color of revenge, the color of a deep cut. The clock on the mantel hit 11:50 p.m. The ticking clock pressure began to weigh on my chest, not from fear, but from a cruel excitement. I had scheduled the 2-3-and-me notification system to send a synchronized email to all 4 accounts at this exact moment. I pulled out my phone, my finger sliding across the screen. "Only 10 minutes until the new year," I said quietly, loud enough for Sophia to hear. She mocked me. 10 minutes until you disappear from here to make room for people who actually belong at this party, Elena." Right then, a ting sounded from Arthur's tuxedo pocket, then another from Lydia's clutch. And finally, Sophia's phone. A strange silence began to spread from the epicenter of the Vance family across the room. The guests started looking at them curiously. Arthur frowned, taking out his phone, annoyed at being interrupted during his speech. His face shifted from smugness to a bizarre confusion. Lydia opened hers too, and instantly, her perfect makeup seemed to crumble. Her lips trembled, her eyes darting frantically from Arthur to me. I stepped out of the shadows of the balcony and into the spotlight where they stood. My smile now wasn't the forced grin of the mistake. It was the sharp smile of an executioner. "Happy New Year, Mother, Father," I said in a chillingly calm voice. "I hope my gift of the truth is heavy enough to start a new chapter for our family." Every eye in the ballroom fixed on the glowing phone screen in Arthur's hand, where the words "DNA test results, paternity alert" were displayed in plain sight. The first bomb had detonated. The noise of the New Year's party was suddenly extinguished by a bone-chilling stillness, the kind of silence that only exists before a death sentence is read. Arthur Vance, the man who just moments ago was boasting about his pure blood, stood frozen in the middle of the hall. His fingers, heavy with gold rings, trembled against the iPhone screen, the blue light reflecting off a face that was turning the color of ash. The bright red text from the 2-3-and-me result wasn't just a technical notification. It was a dagger through the heart of the Vance empire. 0% probability of paternity between Arthur Vance and Elena Vance. Those words were a slap that echoed louder than the fireworks exploding outside. I stood there, arms crossed, feeling the chill of the red wine glass against my palm. I didn't feel hurt, and I didn't feel ashamed. I felt a strange liberation. Lydia, the mother who had always insulted me as the mistake, now looked like a cornered animal. Her face distorted under the chandeliers, her expensive Chanel foundation unable to hide the pale guilt splotching her skin. "Arthur, don't believe it," she shrieked, her usually refined voice now shrill and panicked. "She tampered with the results. Elena is a liar. She's always been jealous of this family and used a fake kit to frame me." But Arthur Vance was no fool. He was a veteran litigation attorney who lived by hard evidence and irrefutable arguments. He looked at my ancestry chart, a blend completely foreign to the Anglo-Saxon lineage he worshipped, like a religion. His gaze shifted from the phone to Lydia, then to me. In that moment, the mysterious smile I had prepared finally bloomed. This was no longer the forced smile of the rejected child. It was the smile of someone who had flipped the board. I didn't have to fake the science. "Mother," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the dead silence of the ballroom. "Science only confirmed what you tried to bury in that rusted tin in the attic. Julian's letters. You still remember his name, don't you?" The humiliation began to spread through the crowd like a virus. Whispers rose behind covered mouths. The looks of disdain that had always been reserved for me. The mistake now pivoted toward Lydia, the woman who had just been stripped of her hypocritical mask. Arthur looked at his wife with a loathing I had never seen. "You brought a bastard into my house and made me raise her for 20 years?" He roared, his voice thick with the rage of a man betrayed at the deepest level. Lydia backed away, crashing into a buffet table and sending champagne glasses shattered onto the floor into 1,000 pieces, just like the fake perfection of this family. But as Lydia struggled to find an excuse, she had no idea this was just the beginning of the nightmare. The first bomb had gone off, destroying my status. But the second bomb, the one that would wipe out Arthur's final pride in Sophia, was the one that would end it all. I took a sip of my wine. The bitterness of the Cabernet Sauvignon had never tasted so sweet. Arthur Vance's fury was a storm that wiped away the last traces of civility in the mansion. He roared, insults spitting out like venom aimed directly at Lydia, who was collapsing amidst the wreckage of shattered crystal. "You turned this bloodline into a joke. You tricked me into raising the love child of some cheap artist," Arthur screamed, his face bright red with humiliation. Sophia, standing by her father, rushed to grab his arm, her eyes full of disgust for the mother who had just been exposed. "Father, don't let her poison the air anymore. I always knew there was something wrong with her. Thank God I carry your pure blood. I'll help you rebuild our reputation." I watched the drama with cold amusement. Sophia, the genius sister, the one always willing to trample others to keep her princess status, was now trying to pick the winning side. But she had forgotten one thing. I was the one who bought all these DNA kits. I stepped forward, taking my time, the sound of my heels hitting the floor like hammers on a coffin of lies. I reached out and gently turned the screen of the iPad Sophia was holding. "Sweetie, you seem a bit too confident in your so-called pure blood," I said, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "Look at the third line of your results. The maternal match section." Sophia looked down, and the breath caught in her throat. The number on the screen wasn't the expected 99.9%, it was 0%. Once again, that zero appeared like a death sentence. Sophia was not Lydia's child. The guests, already shocked by Lydia's betrayal, fell into a complete, stunned silence at a twist no Hollywood movie could script. Arthur froze, his heavy breathing coming to an abrupt stop. His face went from bright red to the white of a corpse. "Father, would you like to explain to your dear wife why the genius daughter she's worshipped for 18 years doesn't have a single drop of her blood?" I asked, my sharp gaze piercing Arthur. The truth began to surface. Years ago, when Lydia was devastated by a miscarriage, or perhaps an excuse Arthur used to cover it up, he had secretly brought home his own illegitimate child from an affair with another woman, swapped the babies, and turned her into Sophia Vance, the symbol of the family's perfection. Arthur wasn't clean. He was a hypocrite, even more disgusting than Lydia, a man who built an entire empire on a brutal deception against his own wife. Now, there were no victims, and there were no winners. Lydia looked at Arthur with madness in her eyes, realizing the man she worshipped had lied to her about the very child she had poured her life into. Sophia collapsed, realizing her status was just the product of an affair. The ballroom turned into a battleground of the betrayed and the betrayers. Right then, the clock struck midnight. Fireworks exploded outside the window, lighting up the Greenwich sky. But inside, the Vance Empire had officially burned to ash by the very blood they had always idolized. The fireworks over the Long Island Sound boomed, lighting up the sky in streaks of gold and blue. But inside the Vance mansion, the only thing burning was their reputation and self-respect. The scene was gruesome and satisfying. Arthur Vance, the powerful attorney, pointing his finger in Lydia's face, screaming about the years of being a cuckold, while Lydia, mascara running down her face, spat back the most venomous words about the secret of the illegitimate Sophia. And Sophia, the golden sister who had been insulting me moments ago, was now sitting on the floor with her head in her hands, realizing her princess title was a cheap lie. The elite guests began to flee the ballroom like rats leaving a sinking ship, rushing for their coats, already whispering the scandalous details into their phones for tomorrow's tabloids. The social death of the Vances was finalized. I stood there, completely detached from the chaos, feeling a surge of clean air like I'd never felt before. I walked over to the long banquet table covered in white linen, where a massive red velvet cake sat untouched, the symbol of the fake sweetness of this party. I calmly picked up a silver fork and cut myself the best piece, the rich cream cheese frosting melting on my tongue. It tasted like freedom. I looked at my mother one last time, the woman who had called me the mistake for 2 decades. "You know, Mom?" I said, my voice no longer trembling, but possessing the sharpness of a victor. "I might be your mistake with an old lover, but at least I'm not a professional fraud like you and Dad. Happy New Year. I hope this truth keeps you warm during the divorce trials." I set the fork down and turned my back on the wreckage of what they called a family. I didn't take anything from that house, not the expensive bags or the sparkling jewelry they used to buy my silence. I only took myself. As I stepped out the front door, the bite of the Connecticut winter hit my skin, but my heart was strangely warm. I stopped on the porch, looking back at the mansion ablaze with lights on the outside, but empty and full of hate on the inside. The brightest smile I'd ever had in my life spread across my lips, the smile of someone who had personally torched the glass cage that held her. I stepped onto the snow-covered path as the final firework exploded overhead. I was no longer Elena Vance, the mistake. I was simply Elena, the only one leaving this ash heap with her soul intact. The future ahead might be unfamiliar, but it was mine, entirely mine. A real new year had finally begun.